What will Democrats do next? Plus, immigration, infrastructure, and the presidential race. We'll talk about it with Representatives Debbie Dingell and Paul Mitchell. And Detroit gets some good news and some bad reviews on the development front. Today is Sunday, April 28, 2019, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. Good to have you with us this morning after our neck of the woods had a pretty busy week of national attention. Some of it was really good. Waymo, the self-driving car company, announced it's going to be building its autonomous cars in Detroit. They'll be repurposing an American axle plant. It is exactly the kind of news you want to see as the city works to remain the auto capital of the world. Add to that, Ford announcing a $500 million investment in Rivian, the electric pickup truck maker. All really good signs for the future. Some of the other attention this week, though, not as rosy. HBO gave national attention to the so far unfulfilled promise of the District Detroit. Yes, the stadium is terrific, but what of the neighborhoods that were promised that made it so much easier to make the case for public dollars to be spent on it all? We're going to talk about that coming up this morning. We're going to start, though, with politics because that national spotlight also included Vice President Mike Pence, who came to town this week, another reminder of Michigan's primacy in the upcoming election cycle. And that election pool added another swimmer this week with Joe Biden jumping in to the surprise of no one. But behind it all, the debate continues for Democrats over whether they should be focusing on an election or on an impeachment. We'll talk about that, too, as we begin this morning with both sides in the aisle from the Michigan delegation, Republican Paul Mitchell and Democrat Debbie Dingell. They're up first this morning on Flashpoint. Many predicted the release of the Mueller report was hardly an ending. The fights go on now as House members are fighting to hear, see, and learn more, all of which seems destined for one court battle after another. That's just one topic among many for those representing the state of Michigan at the U.S. Capitol. Very happy to have two members of the Michigan delegation with us this morning, Democrat Debbie Dingell from Michigan's 12th District and Paul Mitchell, the Republican from the 10th District. Thank you both for coming this morning. I've got so many things I want us to get through. Let's rifle through a bunch of these, and let's start with Congressman Mitchell. Are the Democrats overreaching with all this information that they want? They now want people to come testify like Don McGahn. They want to see the president's tax returns. Is this all an overreach, or are they well within their right to ask for it?
Well, what I think we need to do is move beyond the investigation frenzy and do things that make a difference for the American people. The reality is we have big issues to deal with, immigration and our border.
Sure.
We've got USMCA that I hope we talk about today because that trade agreement with Mexico and Canada is huge.
Yes.
We also have to deal with infrastructure. There's states issues, there's federal issues. It's hard to do those things when we spend so much time on this investigation.
Understood. But are they within these requests? Are they proper?
Congress can try to do whatever it wants to do.
Yes.
I mean, you've seen a variety of it. The Congress could do a lot of things. The question is whether or not it's going to have any impact for the American people. The idea of pushing on impeachment. Impeachment's for high crimes and misdemeanors, not because we don't like somebody. That's what elections are for. Let's have an election. We're going to have one.
Shouldn't we allow? Should we be able to see the president's tax returns? You were a businessman who moved into politics.
Sure.
Same kind of deal.
I think that was adjudicated when the president was elected in 2016. He refused to release them. People voted for him.
He's also refused to divorce himself from his businesses.
Well, there's nothing that requires him to do that.
Understood.
So the reality is he's a businessman, and why would you want someone to give up their entire business to do something like that?
Congresswoman, on all that, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And Paul is absolutely right that we've got to keep working for the people. We've got to do something about prescription drugs. We've got to take care of people who are worried about not having health care taken away from them for pre-existing conditions. I call it NAFTA 2.0 because NAFTA 1.0 has left factories closed here, and we do need to do something on trade. Yet I will also say that the Congress has an oversight responsibility that our founders gave to us, and the fact of the matter is that we've got three strong chairmen, Jerry Nadler at the House Judiciary Committee, Adam Schiff at House Intelligence, and Elijah Cummings at House Oversight and Investigations. And if you've read that report, and I've read it, I'm on my second read of it now, it is very clear that Russia tried to interfere in our elections. What's also deeply disturbing is that Russia is trying to divide us as a country, and I want to make sure they don't win at dividing us as a country, and that they're going to try to do it again in 2020. Michigan was a state that was targeted. That's all in the report. We were targeted by Facebook ads.
From your reading of it, is impeachment something that the House should be pursuing?
I think that right now we need to let the 3 committees continue. There are 3 good, strong committees continuing their investigation, getting the facts. I want to hear Mueller testify, answer a number of questions directly. I will say that I think the Attorney General was acting more like a defense attorney than he was the chief law enforcement officer when he gave that 4-page report. It did not summarize that 438 pages, but we have to do both. We can't, right? You can't say that what happened was okay. So we need to hold people accountable. How we do that is what we've got to.
Except let's be honest about it. The Mueller report doesn't illuminate us extensively in terms of how the Russians impact the election then or going forward. And we know that. And the reality is we have to take steps to make sure that the American people understand what information is coming before them and actually assess it. Part of the problem we have with interference in our election is people just looking at a clip of social media and deciding it's fact rather than actually look at the news like they do here today. Actually consume some news and understand. That's not in the Mueller report. The reality is there's very little in the Mueller report about how it is the Russians hack.
But do you get the sense that we're doing anything
files.
about Russian influence to keep it from happening a year and a half from now?
I think we put money in last term. We continue to put money in this term in terms of assisting states to improve their election systems, to secure their election systems. There's a whole network to do that in terms of meeting to secure voter registration files, which is a vulnerability. The good things about our election system is it's decentralized. There is no central point that you could hack to affect election results.
Let's take up where you both led to then on this new version of NAFTA, the USMCA. You seem to feel like this is a good way forward.
Well, I think USMCA is an improvement over NAFTA in every way, shape, and form. You could talk about the area. My dad was an auto worker, built trucks on the line for General Motors before his plant closed and he got laid off, took an early retirement because of NAFTA. Ultimately, foreign competition limited his job as they restructured. If you look at labor standards, if you look about improving the wages of Mexico workers so that, in fact, we don't lose jobs in Mexico, look at environmental standards. Those are requirements are stepped up. We've got a 3-party agreement. We push those parties hard. Let's approve this. And one thing that's in it that I campaigned for when I ran is that we have a provision that we open it every several years, not an election year, and reopen it and renegotiate it, not expect it's going to last as it has for 25, 30 years.
Congresswoman, Democrats and unions in particular have complained about NAFTA bitterly, and now there's a sense among some on the Republican side that you just don't want to give into the fact that this is a better plan and a good idea because it's a political win for the president that you don't like.
First of all, I've said that I will work with the president if it'll help the working men and women of my district. So I have never said that I'm going to oppose this. I am not we both, I would think you agree with me, Paul, that we need to make sure that Mexico actually does something about its labor laws before this even moves forward, because they're very weak and there's no enforcement mechanism really, and they're not allowed.
Yes, sure.
I'm also feel very strongly that I'm not going to support a NAFTA 2.0 until I'm assured that General Motors isn't going to put a Blazer plant in Mexico where they're paying $1.50 an hour. This is documented versus what they're paying here and bringing the product back into this country. That's not a level playing field.
We're seeing already, because of the movements that have taken on trade, is that FCA, for example, has put $4.4 billion, $4.5 billion in Detroit for the new plant. They made significant investments. Ford has. I think they're getting the message, and we're making it a more competitive environment. This trade agreement makes it better. And I agree. We need to get Mexico to actually enforce their laws, put them in place. And we need to get Canada to come along as well, because frankly, there are points in time that Canadians have taken advantage of us while smiling and shaking our hand. And we need a fair trade deal.
You mentioned infrastructure earlier. I want to talk about that as well. I think what we've watched happen in Michigan, Congresswoman, over our inability to fix our roads and come to some sort of agreement on something that everybody does agree is Michigan's, perhaps its biggest problem, certainly our biggest day-to-day problem, and yet we haven't been able to come up with a solution. That seems to me an indicator of where the infrastructure problems end up going as you debate them, whether it's on a local level like this or as nationally we try to figure out our infrastructure problems.
Well, there's a meeting at the White House next week with the leaders of both the House and the Senate to talk about an infrastructure bill. Congressman DeFazio, who is chair of the Transportation Committee, has been drafting a bill. I think we do. I hated this phrase, but it's become part of my lingo. Excuse me, on television, we need to fix the damn roads. I do think it's a place that we should be able to agree. It will create jobs. It will fix not only our roads and our bridges, but we need to, so for starters, if we want to get to, we need to support electric vehicles. We need to build an infrastructure so that people will have confidence in electric vehicles and they'll be able to have long range. We need
That's
to make
a race
sure
we're already clearly losing to China.
We're clearly losing it, and quite frankly, with all due respect, the president's bad-mouthing electric vehicles doesn't help anybody. All of the OEMs, and China is a growth market for us for electric vehicles. We need to encourage their production and be encouraging people to buy them to get to a carbonless society.
I agree we need an infrastructure package, but we need to talk about infrastructure. What happens frequently and happened in the beginning of this conversation is we talk about roads and bridges. The reality is our infrastructure across the nation is crumbling in terms of water systems, wastewater systems, rural broadband, short-line railroads, waterways, harbors.
Yes.
It is massive. And the problem is that even in the current, I serve on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. The current conversations are about, do we increase the gas tax? Do we do this little around the edges? I met with the National Economic Council before we left Washington and proposed a comprehensive infrastructure program that some money stays to the federal government, some percentage. The majority of the money goes to states as a block grant for them to decide what to do with the infrastructure needs they have, match it with their state and local money to fix their needs. What's needed for infrastructure in Michigan is dramatically different than what's needed in Ohio or New York, but we try to do it out of Washington. Send that money to the states and have them plan it and do competitive grants for it.
Where's that money going to come from?
Well, that's the tough question, right? Everyone wants to. And I've got an op-ed I'm working on with I believe, with the vice chair of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, Democrat. Most of my bills, in fact, are bipartisan, to see if we can put forth an op-ed talking about how we fund it, so we can fully fund it, because the Highway Trust Fund will go belly up in 2022.
Is there any way of doing it without us all paying more in taxes of some kind?
Well, there is in part, because if we export about 22-25% of our natural gas. If we deal with taxing that effectively, someone else gets to pay a big part of it, and they use our infrastructure when they send products to the United States.
We also have a problem that less money is going into the Highway Trust Fund because we've made more fuel-efficient vehicles. And if we've made more fuel-efficient vehicles, which has a good outcome, there's less money going into it. So we need to look at proposals of vehicle miles traveled. We need to. Some of those ideas that Paul's talking about, we need to look about, but we need to be honest. We've got a broken infrastructure in all the areas that you talked about.
How do you see paying for it?
I think we're going to have to at some point. I don't disagree with the idea that he just put forth, but if we're honest, there will have to be an increase in taxes of some kind at some point, along with capturing vehicles miles traveled or other kinds of.
We talked about that, vehicles miles traveled. I talked in various groups I met with the last 2 weeks, and I can tell you that on the average person in my district and other areas, there's no way on Lord's green earth that they're going to go forward with vehicles miles traveled, because they see it as big brother. And the average driver around here is not going to want to have
privacy issue.
It's absolutely a privacy issue.
Yeah.
And you see all the stuff going on about data reading in your car and who has the rights to it, right?
Sure. Part of why China is out in front is look at the data that they're collecting and the way that traffic works.
Privacy is an illusion in China.
Yes,
privacy is an illusion in the United States of America.
We could talk about flights and warrants. Yes.
Exactly right. I wanted to ask you both about this decision that we saw this week, where we had a federal panel say that we've had gerrymandering that has been out of line in the state of Michigan. Could throw a lot of things into turmoil here in the 2020 election, especially if you're in the state Senate. But how do we move forward with this?
I think we need to get a stay from the Supreme Court. And the reason I do is that we voted, whether you agreed or not, to have a redistricting commission in 2022 after the census. To have a fire drill to complete redistricting by August of this year, to theoretically address gerrymandering, and then do it all again in 2022 is absolutely insane. You ask people on the street sometimes who their member of Congress is or who their state senator is, most of them don't know. You're going to make that worse. I wasn't in Congress, I wasn't in politics in 2010 when these seats were done. But you look at my district, it's the thumb.
Right.
More than half of it is surrounded by water. I want to know how it was gerrymandered. I get secret voters in the Lake Huron. I don't know. Think about this. But let's deal with it so that as voters have time to assess who's representing them, rather than have a fire drill to fix a problem that at the last minute when in fact you've got a commission coming up.
The old saw is that panic generally is not the best time to make a decision that's going to have long term. What do you expect?
Well, I think people deserve equal representation, and this court case funded. I think as an aside, people should look up at what they're putting in writing, and the emails definitively prove. Those are the most embarrassing thing, are that people really are clear that they were trying to put back some of these districts. So I think we're going to have to see how the courts play out. I'm concerned that the way that some of the redistricting is right now, and that's what's happened, is it contributes to this partisan on both sides, the far right and the far left, and that more evenly divided districts where people are represented will contribute to people having to listen to each other and having to actually have conversations, which is healthy for democracy.
Lastly, I'm going to ask you both if this is healthy for Michigan, that we are such the focus of so much electoral attention here already. We've got one of the second Democratic debate is going to be here in Detroit this coming summer, and we're still a long way away from it all. Is this a good thing to have this much attention on Michigan, or does it just make things nasty here as we fight it out?
It's very good. I still say Iowa and New Hampshire shouldn't have a lock on going first. When you have to come into the state of Michigan and you have to talk about the issues that matter to working men and women across this state, it's good for the state.
I agree. I mean, I think Michigan is a bellwether in many senses. Yeah. President Trump won Michigan by 10,600 votes. A lot of us are people like my dad, who was a UAW guy, retired. Voted for President Trump, I guarantee, and passed away in December because he thought he would help the working people. I think you have to speak to people here in the state, and I agree. New Hampshire shouldn't get to be first. We represent a big part of America.
Yeah. Great. Both of you, thanks so much for being here. I got to half of what I had. We'll continue with more good news and bad news this week on the economic front for Michigan. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.